Hello, UK Crime Book Club. I am thrilled that my first interview of 2024 is about one of the good guys with the absolutely lovely Araminta Hall. I'm thrilled to have you here. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me on. It's so nice to be here.
It's lovely to have you. So, do you want to start us off by telling us as much as you can about
I know
one of
it's,
the good guys? It's
we
so
were just
hard to
saying, it's
discuss.
such a difficult book to summarize because there's so much you could give away, and yeah, I don't want to spoil it. So, yeah,
Yeah.
a very sort of short summary. It's a book about a man called Cole who goes to live on a very remote stretch of the south coast of England, because he's sort of recovering from a broken heart. His marriage has broken down, and he really genuinely can't understand what went wrong. He
Mm.
really believes that, he sort of thinks he was everything that a woman would want. He's not a heavy drinker. Wants to, he's very domestic. He wants to share the childcare. He has no problem with his wife earning lots more money than him, all those sorts of things. So he
Mm.
gets there and he feels pretty shattered, and he meets quite quickly a woman who's living about a 15-minute walk from him in this dilapidated cottage on the edge of a crumbling cliff. And she's called Lenny, and she's an artist. And they strike up this sort of tentative friendship, which you don't know if maybe it's going to become more or not. And meanwhile, there are two young women doing a coast to coast walk, and it's a charity walk, and
Mm.
they are protesting male violence against women. And they're getting closer and closer to Cole and Lenny. And when they reach them, they just vanish without a trace. And there is, as sort of happens when a certain type of woman goes missing, it becomes this absolutely massive media story. And as the days go by and no trace is found of these women, um, the frenzy sort of builds and builds. And I can't really say much more.
No, I think you've done really well there. I really
Thank
do.
you.
But thank you for making my job so so difficult tonight.
Yeah, sorry.
No, let's go into the certain kind of women because they are
Mm.
attractive, educated, strong women,
Yeah,
young, and they really have a point to make and they know what they want to say,
yeah.
and they're undertaking this walk and straight from the off. I mean, it gets fairly dark quite quickly with the comments that are
Mm.
left on, and it's something that's touched on a lot throughout the entire story. The other ways that you use the media, such as replies to tweets and things, or replies to the social media, to show the kind of crap we're all dealing with. You put yourself even remotely into the public eye, and everyone's got an opinion, and not all of it's very nice.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was really important for me to include social media and a little bit of the traditional media in my book, because I
Mm.
do think social media especially is sort of the place where misogyny is allowed to fester. Like
Oh yeah.
I think that it's a totally unregulated space, and I think we are all, I mean, I don't think any of us actually are deluded enough to think that just because it's not okay anymore to touch a woman or to make a lewd comment or to
Mm.
discriminate against us at work or something. I think it's pretty delusional to think that those feelings vanished overnight and suddenly everybody loves everybody. And for
Yeah.
me, I think social media is a place where you really see that the hatred is still really visceral. I mean,
Yeah.
you just have to you don't even have to do a deep dive. You just have to, I mean, when I was researching this book, I mean, I use social media in that I'm on Twitter and Instagram, but I'm not like a massive user who puts my personal life on there. I use it for work. And I hadn't really ever had like any terrible comments. I'd had a few, but nothing really bad. I
Mm.
mean, just scratching the surface of social media, I realized that there's a lot of women who are just daily being abused. And if you do something like, if you're a pretty young woman who's doing a charity walk protesting male violence, I mean, you are going to get it. And it's so,
Oh yeah.
I was really keen to include all that, because I think it really maybe tells us what people are actually thinking. I mean, a certain type of person, obviously, I'm not suggesting everyone is thinking like that. So yeah, the book has, especially in the third section of the book, it has a lot of social media in it.
I think one of the really interesting things that you did was you showed that some people's opinion is very fixed. You know, they are horrible and that is not going to change. But you did have some people's opinion changing because they had, and this is quite far on in the book, so I'm being very basic about how I word this,
Yeah.
but you do see some social media's opinion change in their comments, because you will see that they had straight away, they had an opinion of what they thought was going on and what everybody involved, you know, how the situation, how do I word this? How they think from one headline or one news story, their opinion of that person, and actually how bad some of them feel as the facts start to come out and they think, oh, I really judged. And it was nice to see that element being showed, that some people do see things and they change their opinion as they educate themselves.
Yeah.
And they do have a bit of guilt and shame associated with it. It was
Yeah.
really nice to see that side be explored.
Oh, good. Yeah, because I mean, I hope that happens. I feel like what social media has done is it's made our arguments very binary. Like, you have to come down on a side. I noticed that in whatever's being discussed. It's like, I grew up in a time, you know, before, so I was a young woman in a time before social media, and
Me too.
yeah, I mean, it's like,
Amazing.
yeah, and it's like, we discussed things, you know, and I'm not, you know, obviously you'd have big arguments and stuff, but I feel like there was more, and I feel like in the media as well, there was more nuanced discussion. So people were less afraid of being offended, and obviously no one wants to offend anybody, and no one wants to be, although I think actually on social media some people do want to offend. I think that is the objective sometimes, but I think that this thing of just having a small space to make your point, and then you have to be for or against something, and actually in a lot of arguments it's very grey, and you can think that some part of it was right and some part of it was wrong. And I think that what happens in One of the Good Guys, which obviously we can't talk about, is one of those arguments where you can see both sides of it by the end, and you don't necessarily have to come down on a side. And I think that's an uncomfortable space for us all to occupy at the moment.
It's one of the things I wrote down. I was reading through my notes because I read the book about a month ago, and it's amazing just how much I remember.
Oh, really? That's
because
very
it's so
nice
well
to hear.
written. One of the notes that I made was about the how the depth of the book comes from the grey areas.
Yeah. I think that's life though, isn't it? I mean, I think that's like, if we were honest, how often are you completely sure about something? Like, I know that it's quite rare for me to be like, I think this and I know I'm right. Like, I think for most of us, there's always that feeling of, oh, maybe I don't know enough about it, or maybe I haven't considered all sides, and then in like within your home or your friendship group or whatever, you know, we still all have discussions, and you know, people aren't afraid to put across, you know, their points of view and all that sort of thing. And actually it makes for such a much more rounded thought process, because then you know, I often will have my mind changed about things, or I will add on to an argument in my mind as to what I was thinking. And so, yeah, it does feel like it's quite, I wanted to see that sort of explored, that grey area that gives us a chance to make up our minds as well.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the amount of points of view used in the book as well, that you show various, so the main characters. So we've got Lenny, we've got Mel, we've got Cole.
Yeah.
They're the really the three mains. You're able to explore the issues raised in the book. And again, I don't know how much we can say about the issues that are raised, but you're able to kind of show how each people thinks, how each person has impacted the opinion of another person, and how much that original opinion changes as things happen. And for some people, they realise that life isn't what they thought it was, and for others, they just don't understand other people's point of view. They don't think that other people are right about them. That was a
Yeah,
lot to juggle for you.
it was. I mean, it was hard to, because some of my favorite novels are ones where you see the same thing from different points of view. So
Yeah,
you hear a story, and then you hear the other side, and then you hear the other side maybe. And so I like writing books like that. I find that really rich, because I think that we always see, each of our experiences, even if we agree that the same thing has happened, obviously the way we see it is going to be completely
yeah,
different. And of course, a lot of that is just based in who you are, the experiences and the things that have led you to the point of of that moment. So it was felt really important to me that I wrote three really distinct voices, that you were able to tell, even if you didn't know who they were, you would be able to tell who was thinking or speaking at any time. Because I yeah, I had to constantly bear in mind, like, who was thinking what they would actually think, what had led them to those thought patterns. And so yeah, there was a lot of rewriting.
one of the things that we kind of discussed before we came live is that we can say that Cole, based on the fact that he's the main male character and the book is called One of the Good Guys, I don't think it gives anything away. I think people will assume certain things about him. Maybe not the kind of level of detail that you'd get
Yeah.
from reading the story, but I don't think it's a spoiler to there was a Reddit thread that you mentioned in the book, and I wrote it down, and it was there's, for anybody who doesn't know, there is a website called Reddit. They have I believe they have an app as well, and there's a thread that excuse my language, but the thread is, "Am I the asshole?" So one of them was, AITA, my girlfriend is threatening to split up with me if I go on defending Cole Simmons. And I was like, I literally said, whoa, like really, like out loud, like what on earth? Like how can you defend? We're not going to go into the details of why
Yeah.
Cole isn't necessarily the good guy that he thinks he is. But it's really interesting that my reactions were, really out loud to it. I said to you beforehand, you've written him so well that at times I wanted to throw the book. I did not. I did not throw the book, but it's so frustrating when you can see something that the character doesn't see about themselves, and the fact
Oh,
that you got my
completely.
rage up.
And that actually, it's really interesting you say that, because that was one of the really interesting things about writing Cole, in that Cole isn't a villain. He's not an out and out villain. He's not
Mm,
actually trying to gaslight. He doesn't want to hurt somebody. He's not your typical thriller villain as
yeah,
such. But I mean, I think that type of person can almost be more dangerous, because someone who truly believes in their own goodness and rightness is a very, very difficult person to come up
yeah,
against. Because if you really believe you're good and right, and you don't think you're doing anything bad, then if someone says no to you, it feels wrong, and you push back on it. So it's like, so it's really, I think it's really hard when you come up against people like Cole. But the interesting thing from what you said is that I was really aware with Cole that I knew him better than he knew himself, which isn't
yeah,
actually something that you normally think when you're writing a character. You normally get completely, you normally feel like you're in the character's head, and you like know what you're doing. And I did get that sense with Cole, but I always was one step ahead of him in a way. So sometimes I would write something and I'd be like, no, he wouldn't have said that, because he's not that aware yet of himself. He's so invested in the idea of himself and in the place he's in society, that actually he doesn't really think anything. He doesn't see the nuances in things,
yeah.
basically, sometimes. So yeah, that is. But I also think, going back to that Reddit thread, I think that what Cole, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, Cole becomes embroiled in the investigation, and of these missing women. And actually, I think we've all seen that play out in the media, that, just based on tiny pieces of information, people are like, he's guilty, he's not guilty, and they're sort of, you hear those conversations play out and you're like, we don't know anything. The police never give anything away.
Yeah.
We don't actually know what's going on behind anybody's closed door, but people become so passionate about their support or non-support for people that I did want to sort of reflect that as well.
You mentioned, and again, I'm going to be careful because this isn't about your book. This is about something that is on Netflix at the moment that I watched. You mentioned Good Girl, and I watched something called, I wish I'd written the title down.
Oh, is it American Nightmare or something?
Yes.
And Gone Girl,
yeah.
Gillian Flynn.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've watched that recently. It's 3 episodes, and it in real life kind of looks at things the way your book does. So we're shown a certain thing in the first episode, and we've got a very fixed opinion of what's going to happen in the next episode. And then it completely flips. It's not what you expect at all. And it's real life, and it's horrifying. I remember reading one of the Good Guys and being really relieved that it's not real life, and then thinking, but actually,
it could be.
Yeah.
No, really, do you know, a couple of people have actually asked me if it was a real case ever, or if I lifted some of the stuff from social media. I mean, the whole thing is a work of fiction, so none of it is true. But I do feel like we have become, and I think things like Netflix are slightly to blame for this. We've come to see female disappearances and things like that as a form of entertainment, and I think that's something that true crime has a lot to answer for. Well, we all have a lot to answer for because we all consume it, and I consume it. I mean, I've watched the first 2 episodes of American Nightmare. I haven't watched the 3rd yet, and it's like, it's fascinating, but you're sitting there thinking, this is crazy, because everybody made a judgment basically so quickly. I like you're saying, like the first episode and then the second episode completely switches, and I don't know what's going to happen in the 3rd episode.
And I'm not going to tell you. I'm a big fan of not spoiling things.
Exactly. But you can tell it's going to be crazy, and it's like,
you have no idea where this is headed.
No, and that, I think that is the same as one of the Good Guys. I think I haven't yet had anybody who has said to me, oh yeah, I guessed what was going to happen. I guessed the ending. Like, nobody has said that to me yet, and I'm sure somebody will, but not it hasn't actually happened yet, because I think it is that thing of, we're used to neat endings in, Netflix series. There are so many fictional series now about missing women, and then I think we become quite confused when we see it in real life. Like, I think the Nicola Bulley case was the last case in point where it felt like being updated on a Netflix series. It felt like your next episode coming every day.
Yeah.
And I think also the judgment we put on the women who go missing is crazy. Like, and we saw that with her completely. And I just think we see it all the time. It's like the woman is always suspected, and the woman is always almost blamed for being a victim. Like, why were you walking the coastal path, or why were you drunk in a bar, or whatever it is? It's like we do get really blamed, and I think that there is something really terrifying in that for all of us, I think.
Yeah, and it opens a lot of conversations to well, why do you think that the woman was to blame? Because she's not the one who hurt herself in some way. Somebody else made that choice. Men can go for a walk and a run at night.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wouldn't feel comfortable. I used to go running a lot. I would not go running alone at night.
No way. I mean, I don't think any of us would. And I think, that comes into play in my book, in that, the women are blamed for doing this coastal walk, and they're camping. Their whole aim is not to to just sort of to live off the land or whatever for the time it takes them. And immediately people start saying, that was crazy. They're like 2 young women alone in a tent in the middle of a field. It's crazy, sort of thing. And so I do think that there is, I really wanted to sort of reflect all that. but then I think also what's happened is not something that that is easy, you know, that's sort of guessable. But
Yeah, I am not going to touch on anything
no,
to do
I
with the
don't
end
think
of the
we
book
can,
at
because
all. No,
no,
I
because I
think
think
it's
actually with
too
this
easy
book,
to give it away.
I mean, obviously, with every thriller, the twist is really important, and I've
Yeah,
always written twists, obviously. But I think with this book, the twist is sort of the point of the book. So I think that giving it away is it would be a real spoiler to say
yeah.
anything close to that. So
Excuse me. Yeah, it would. We talked about the information, and I'm just thinking about the Nicola Bully case that you just raised, and how the police are obviously only allowed to share so much, and because the facts that they do know aren't always things that can be released, people make judgments on that, forgetting about the fact that men were tramping through the woods with phones, making TikTok videos, recording things that potentially disrupting evidence. You would never know. There are so many different things that happen, and the police are dealing with, the men in the woods. They're dealing with psychics who've had visions. They're
yeah.
dealing with journalists. They're dealing with just nosy neighbours. There's so many things that can have an impact and slow things down. And everybody says they want to get to the truth, but really, I think a lot of people are just interested in the story.
Oh, completely. And I think that was quite interesting, writing a story about how we all interpret stories and how we
Yeah,
tell each other stories. I was sort of aware of that all the time I was writing, that I was telling multiple stories within one story, and then the story was about how we tell stories. In fact, I had to sort of keep that all in my mind quite a lot, because
yeah,
and I do feel like it was almost like being the police, in that you are in possession of the facts, but it was obviously, to create a good reading experience, I had to only, I couldn't, there was so much I couldn't say until
yeah,
we got close to the end of the book. So
yeah,
that was sort of a balancing act, because I don't like reading books where the narrator has lied to you. So it had to be done where actually it's all in there. Like if you could go back and actually work it out, but it's
yeah,
and yeah, no point do any of the characters, when they're speaking directly to you, they might lie to each other, in fact they do, but when they're talking directly to the reader, they never lie. We
mm,
are inside their head, and we don't, I mean, we do actually we all do lie to ourselves about certain things, but in general we don't lie about the things we've done, unless you're, a psychopath, which I don't think any of these three are psychopaths. They're like, so it was, yeah, that was an interesting balancing act.
I have to ask about when you're deciding to what book you're going to write, and you're gonna have to live with these characters inside your head for a
Yeah.
while. Even by the time you've done the first draft, second draft, however many drafts, and you do the edits and all of that. Did you feel how you expected to feel living with this inside your head for so long? Did you
um
have any kind of expectation about it?
I mean, I suppose I had, it's some, the general themes of this novel are things that I've been thinking about a lot, and, for many years. And like I've, I've used these themes in previous novels. I mean, obviously in completely different ways. So
Mm,
it's something that I think about a lot. I mean, I do find myself getting angry when I'm writing about them, and, and still now when I'm talking about them a lot, because I do think it's unfair. I think that the way we live is unfair, and I think that
yeah,
this book was really born out of that feeling of, I just felt like, I mean, I felt sort of angry about gender relations since, for as long as I can remember thinking about
mm,
anything sort of politically. And I've written books about it. I had a book called Our Kind of Cruelty, which was very much about how women's voices are very rarely heard, and how, we're not listened to, and all those things. And a lot of the same sort of ideas are in this book, but we've had Me Too in the middle of it, and I sort of naively felt with Me Too that things were going to change. And, you know, at first it did feel like that was happening. You know, laws changed, and, you know, it became, you know, it's very rare to get wolf whistled. Well, I mean, I'd never be wolf whistled now anymore anyway, but, you know, it's very rare for anything like that to happen. You know, people are more respectful on a public level. And I noticed that I was still feeling sort of angry and weird, and all my women friends were as well, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I went for the place where this novel is set. I live in Brighton, and the place where it's set is about a 40-minute drive outside of Brighton, and it's a walk that I've done with my family for years, you know, and is literally, you know, this coastal path, and you pass these Coast Guard cottages, and every time I pass these cottages, or not every time, but I've seen a woman in one of these cottages. And so, you know, whenever I do that, I always think, my God, I mean, there's no road leading up to it. You have to walk for 20 minutes across the field to get to them. And I've always thought, I'd be so scared living there alone. I mean, I have no idea if she does live there alone or anything, but I always think I'd be so scared living there alone. And like at night, like what would it be like? Anyway, I did that walk one day, and I came back to Brighton, and I went out that night, and I was walking home alone at sort of 10 o'clock at night. I live very centrally. There was nothing, you know, I don't have to cross a park or anything to get home. And I did that thing of turning onto a deserted street, and there was a man behind me, and he like really quickly crossed the road and walked ahead of me. So I knew I was not in any danger from him. But it made me think, oh my God, like I don't feel scared, like really frightened, but I have this like little background of fear in my mind all the time. I'm always like planning my routes. I second guess things a lot. And I was like, it doesn't actually make any difference if I'm alone in a cottage on the edge of a cliff, or if I'm in the middle of a huge, great big bustling city. You know, women have this like little thing in our heads all the time, and it's exhausting and really unfair. And that's what I was suddenly like, that's why I feel angry, and that's why my friends still feel angry. And that was sort of the beginning of the idea for the book, basically.
It's really interesting that he crossed the road. It makes you wonder, was that just a coincidence, or has that conversation been had? Does he have women in his life who have said, if you're walking behind a woman on her own at night, cross the road, walk in a different direction,
definitely.
Stop and take a phone call, do something just to let her know that you're not a threat. I know somebody who kissed his boyfriend so that the younger woman in front of them, a schoolgirl, didn't see them as a threat.
No, completely.
Because they'd been kind of walking on one path, and she'd been catcalled by some builders. This is a young girl in a school uniform. And then so they'd kind of walking behind, but then they'd gone off on one path and she'd gone on another, but then the paths crossed, they diverged. So that's when they decided, right, we'll just have a quick kiss, and then you know.
Oh no, I think that men, I've noticed that personally, that men do that now, which is that these are the sort of things that, you know, we're not going to solve this just as women. You know, men are going to have to help us, and also men are generally obviously great in the same way that, you know, that I think when we're talking about these issues, we're not talking about men against women. We're talking about a certain type, and it is usually man, but there are some women who of that type who we all need to be against, you know. And it's all these sort of, it's that sort of privilege, you know, that is really hard to bang up against. And I do think more and more men are aware. I mean, I've certainly spoken to my husband and son about it, and I do think men are totally aware of that thing of crossing a road and overtaking is a really good way of making a woman feel safe on a dark street. But yeah, I mean, because if someone just says, I'm no threat, you'd be like, oh God, they're definitely
somebody saying to you, I'm one of the good guys, you're going to run a mile.
Run. So yeah, but I think this is what it's going to come down to, and it's going to come down to men calling out men and intervening in situations. And you know, I mean, I certainly remember when I was a young woman, and I was brought up in London, and you know, I took the tube to and from school every day, and I mean, it was a weekly occurrence that somebody would touch you, you know. And I think that would be really unlikely to happen now. And I think that if it did, and people saw, which, you know, people always saw, they would call. I hope that we're getting to that stage where people would call the person out and say it wasn't acceptable and all that. So I think those are just all the things, like, women have sort of just suffered in silence for centuries. You know, we've just sort of gone along with it, because I think what it boils down to is, you know, we are normally physically weaker, and so we know if we're in a one-on-one situation and someone does want to, and a man wants to hurt us, we probably won't come out of it as the victor, because we, just for that basic physical fact. And I think that that's something that society has played on, and, you know, it's really exaggerated our fears, and we need to come to the only way it can happen is if people who are physically stronger use that to help and to be an ally and all those things. And actually, this isn't just true of gender; it's also true of, like, race, sexuality, religion. Absolutely. It's like there are very few people who walk out of their front door every day and feel like, and aren't thinking in the back of their mind, oh, am I safe? Is this going to be okay? You know, all those sorts of things. So
yeah, it is. It does make it a really tricky one. We've got some hellos, so hello to everyone who said hello. Just moving slightly off the topic of the book, but we will be going back to it. Kaz has said there's an incredible range of authors in Brighton. So there is a good group of you. I regularly see photos of, you know, on Facebook of you all having meetups, and there's other things in the pipeline. So is there anything you want to talk about?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a new book festival in Brighton, a new literary festival in Brighton. It's called Beyond the Book, and it's the 6th of April. It's being organised by the writer Davy Fennell. I don't know if, I'm sure lots of you have read his Archer series. They're brilliant. And he's sort of the mastermind behind it, but there's a few of us helping. And I think it's a really good idea, because I think there are so many writers in Brighton, and it's such a sort of good place to set a book. It's got a real reputation as being a bit dodgy, Brighton, and a little bit sort of, you know, crimes are probably being committed. So it's I think it's going to be really fun, and I think it's such a good time of year as well. So I'm pretty sure that tickets are going to go on sale for that very soon.
I know that there's a Facebook page and Twitter page, because I'm already following them.
Oh, excellent.
So it's a good start. Signed up for the newsletter.
Brilliant.
You know, David Fennell starts something, and I am immediately intrigued. I want to know what he's going to be getting up to.
Yes, exactly.
And how about your teaching? You've got various teaching things going on.
Well, at the moment, I'm doing. There's a Goldsborough Goldsborough Books, which is based in London, and they opened a store in Brighton. Oh gosh, probably about 5 years ago. And the man who runs it, David Headley, who owns the store, he's also quite a big literary agent, and they've started a writing school, sort of, you know, a bit like the Curtis Brown one, I guess, you know, that sort of idea. And he's quite involved in it, so he is giving quite a lot of advice and guidance, and students are getting a chance to pitch to him and to other editors and people. I mean, I've not devised the course in any way. It was devised by a writer called P.D. Viner, and he's
the lovely Phil Viner.
He's so lovely.
He was so excited that we were talking about this in London earlier this year. He was so excited of the role that you were going to play.
Oh, right. So sweet of him. He's like, I'm mentoring a couple of people, and I'm giving a few classes as well on, like, I think one of them's on suspense and things like that. But I mean, honestly, it's such a good course. He sent me all the details of it when we were talking about doing it, and I was so impressed. I was like, this is, because I did an MA at Sussex University, and I was like, my goodness, like, if this had been around, I think I would have done this instead. It's like, it's a really, really good course, and he's really thought about the process of writing and also the process of publishing. So he's not just talking about like how you put the sentences on the page. He's talking about actually how you are going to get published. So I think it's super useful. But that's all I'm doing teaching wise at the moment.
We had a conversation, Phil and myself, and I very quickly realised why I was banging my head against the wall with a certain idea.
Oh, really?
And it was so obvious when we got into it. But I know he had a lot of conversations that weekend. And you're right, if you're anywhere near Brighton and you can get to it, I can't imagine any other course being as worthwhile.
No, I agree.
I want him to come and do one in Manchester, but he's not having it.
Yeah, it'd be a bit far for him to go every like 2 nights a week. Yeah. I think he's signing up for next year already. It's called Girls Pro Writing Academy. So it's worth checking out.
Absolutely. Dare I ask what you're working on at the moment?
Well, I mean, as you probably know, the publishing process is so slow that by the time you're promoted, by the time your book comes out, you're a good at least a year away from having done anything on it. Like you've signed off those final pages, you've agreed the cover, everything a good year ago. So I've been doing something new, and I'm contracted for my next book anyway. So I'm doing something new. I mean, I've been doing it for a year now, so it doesn't even feel that new. It feels like the thing that I'm working on at the moment. But I recently showed my agent a draft of it, and she had lots of ideas which were brilliant. But that thing where I'm in that stage of like, okay, I've got to unpick it and put it back together again now. So I'm sort of doing that at the moment.
You're in that really tricky position, that kind of middle bit where you're publishing the last book, you're thinking about the next book, you're trying to remember what happened in the last book without giving spoilers, and you're having all of these interviews and discussing things, and I don't know how you balance that, not spoiling it.
The thing is, I've just had to, since January, because my book came out at the beginning of January, and I had to go to America to promote it and just got back on Monday. And so in a way, I sort of just thought to myself, January's a bit of a write-off. I'm just going to really be promoting it. And it's quite nice if you just give yourself that bit of time where you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on one thing, because it's sort of, otherwise you can feel like you're going a bit mad.
Yeah. But how tricky has it been to not give things away?
And talking about this book, it's been really tricky. And I do sometimes go into a bit of a cold sweat thinking, oh my goodness, have I just said something that's going to ruin the book? But I think, touch wood, so far I haven't done anything yet. And also I've had so many lovely reviews, and I'm so grateful for this, the community of people on Facebook and TikTok and Bookstagram and all those places. And it's so incredible getting those reviews through. But sometimes you do get one that says something quite close to the bone, and you're like, oh, that's nearly a spoiler. But actually, no one has actually said anything that is a complete spoiler. So it's great.
Going back to the book, so as we said, there are 3 kind of main characters overall. So we've got Cole, we've got Lenny, and we've got Mel. Really interesting to see Cole through Mel and Lenny's eyes, and they're quite different women. Obviously, we can talk a bit about why Cole ends up living where he is. I think quite early on. So do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Cole, when we meet Cole, his marriage is finished. That's, he tells you that immediately.
Yeah.
And he cannot understand why, because he is this good guy. And, the story he tells us isn't a lie. He is the person he tells us he is. Yeah. And the big thing that's happened in their marriage is that they have been trying for IVF. And they were trying for a baby, it didn't happen. Then they got into IVF, and they had 2 rounds, and it didn't work. And then they were going for a 3rd round, and just before the embryos, they've got these sort of 3 embryos on ice, viable embryos, and just before they were going to be implanted into Mel, that's when she left him, and he he just can't understand it. And she now wants to destroy the embryos because she's like, I never want to have a baby with you. So I just want them gone. And he sort of thinks that's akin to murder, which I think is, you know, I was obviously been thinking a lot about how abortion's been banned, you know, well, it's not been literally banned in America, but, you know, it's much harder now, and it has been banned in some states. And I was thinking about, you know, all the things that, you know, that always happen to women, and how I mean, I think it's interesting to compare the idea of like forming a life, which is what Cole and Mel are talking about, with the idea of these two young women whose lives are potentially ending, you know. So it's like, I think, you know, people are always very excited about women's bodies when it comes to either procreation or death, basically. And it's like, they don't take account of people. And that's why you know, we hear Cole's side of the story, and then we hear Mel's version of it. And like I say, you know, neither of them are lying. You know, Cole's not lying. It's, you know, it's not like Mel tells us something that, like, tells us this huge thing that Cole has done that he hasn't admitted to, anything like that. But it is just that thing of her experience of it is completely different. And she's tried to understand his experience, but he has never tried to understand hers. And that's what they've come up against, basically.
So then he moves to, as you say, somewhere that you're familiar with. But it's fictionalized in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's a setting that I drew on, but obviously the actual setting is, it's a fictionalized version of it.
That was one of the questions I had planned to ask you, whether it was a setting that you're aware of, or whether it was kind of somewhere that you found through the specific job that he's gone for. And then the setting came with it. I was really intrigued by that.
No, it's completely somewhere that I mean, it's part of the Seven Sisters, so it's a really well-known walk. You know, it's like that's one of the interesting things about this setting is when you do the walk in the day. I mean, I've never done it at night. I doubt anybody would do it at night, because it really is. You are on the edge of a completely steep.
So it really is how it sounds in the book. You know, you're really close to the edge.
Oh yeah, completely.
One step, you've just gone.
Well, I mean, no, they tell you to walk like 3 feet back, because the cliffs are completely eroding as well. You could literally stand. I mean, it has happened a few times that people have got too close and fall, you know, and the cliff has collapsed. But and you do pass 3 Coast Guard cottages. I mean, I made it one on this walk, and that's one of the things I've always been really fascinated about. Like, in the day, if you lived in those cottages, you know, there'd be people like traipsing past, and there's always people taking photographs and all that. But at night, nobody. It's like, if you saw someone outside your house at night, you would be terrified, because you'd think, what are you doing? There's no way anybody's passing through there. You know, you'd have to walk specifically to get there. But also there's a river that runs to it, which is about a 15-minute walk. If you can walk it either from like across the hills, or you can walk it from along the river. And it's for local schools. It's like there's a wildlife hut there, which is actually features in the book. And like, my kids have always, like, all the local schools always do one trip. Like, when you're in primary school, you always do one trip there, and you know, you learn about the local like fauna and animals and everything. And I've sort of volunteered for all those trips when I've got 3 kids, and like when they were in primary school, I went 3 times. And there are wildlife rangers who work there, and I have always, I mean, I don't know if they live there, I don't know anything about them, but it's always struck me as quite a solitary life. You know, they're out on the hills there, and I have always thought, I wonder what attracts someone to doing that sort of thing. And like, it's an interesting type of person who does it. So yeah, so there's a real mix of fiction and reality in it.
I think the idea of living, maybe not on a cliff, but the idea of, you know, kind of a cabin in the woods on a lake. You know, we watch different things on TV, and there's one in, was it Homeland? Really lovely wooden cabin. There's the lake there, and there are other cabins around, but they're out of the way. You know, you can't see them all from each other unless you go to the water. And the idea of living somewhere like that sounds really romantic and wonderful. And how much peace we'd get. And I think the reality would be quite the opposite. I don't think I could live in the middle of nowhere on my own.
I would be, well, I think I'd be terrified, but also I think I'd just go mad, because I think that all that silence and nature and space to think, it's like I want my mind a little bit busy so that I don't have to think too much about anything. And I think it is just that classic like thriller horror trope of cabin, you know. And it's like, I did think there was something interesting about putting my main female character into a cottage on the edge of a cliff with a pounding sea and, you know, just fields on the other side, and just being like, okay, you're completely on your own. Like, no one's going to hear you. If anything happens, anything could happen to you without anybody seeing or hearing. And
Yeah.
it's sort of a classic thriller idea, which I sort of, I tried to subvert in some ways, but you don't really know that at the time.
You've got kind of where you've set it means that there's no cameras. There's there's a little shop and a village pub. There's just kind of a few things. Cole, before he becomes friends with Lenny, walks past her cottage, and like you said, he kind of glanced across and seen the woman, and you can see why that would be the inspiration. It's really interesting to have it set somewhere where there is minimal foot traffic, as you say. There's no cameras. Technology is pretty sparse anyway there. And the people who are there because they kind of want to be left alone.
Exactly.
So, they want that solitude. They crave that.
Exactly. There's not going to be many people, nosy neighbours, wondering what you're up to. Well, there are none. And like you say, no CCTV. You can't even, a bus is not going to pass. Nothing is, the only people who are there because they want to be there. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic. It's totally different from a city where people often end up in places, or you move because of a job or anything like that. Whereas this is a very specific desire to be alone. But of course, because we're humans, actually, we often think we want to be alone when we don't necessarily, which is certainly Cole's. He likes to think of himself as like going back to nature and embracing this life. But in fact, it's another thing he hasn't thought about properly. He hasn't really considered who he is and what he needs. And so that's part of his meeting of Lenny.
This week I had a message from one of my friends, and she said, she's asking, what was your interview on this week? And she said, this is that book that I have seen everywhere. She hasn't read it yet. She said, this is that book that everybody seems to be talking about everywhere. It's been all over social media. Has this been the biggest one in terms of the social media discussions? Because I said to you before we started, I feel like you've written the perfect book at the perfect time. You've hit on that thing that everybody's looking for. Everybody wants that right idea at the right time to take off. And this really feels like that's what's happened with this book.
That's really kind. I mean, I think I was saying that I have never written a book before where everybody sort of says the same thing about it, which is exactly what I meant when I wrote it. And that's so, I mean, I think, when you write a book, you would totally understand that people are going to interpret it in different ways. And I, as a writer, don't feel, upset by that. I sort of think, everybody should interpret things in the way they see it. But with this book, everybody's interpretation has been pretty much what I had meant when I wrote it. And there is something incredible about that as a writer, to feel like, you've sort of, found that moment where people are, and it's made me really hopeful, actually, because it's made me think like people are, we as women are thinking the same thing. And we are all at this point of like this tipping point of like, actually things do need to change now. We've waited for change for a long time. We thought it was coming with Me Too. And now actually we're going to make it happen. If it doesn't happen, we are going to do something. So I've never had a book discuss this much on social media. I mean, Our Kind of Cruelty was, lots of people were talking about it and stuff, and it did generate, but it was a much more divisive book, Our Kind of Cruelty. People really hated the character, the main character, or really loved him. And it was So it was, but with this book, everybody seems to agree, which is, yeah, it's so incredible. It's really amazing.
So did you kind of get that vibe straight from the reviews when ARCs were sent out, and
Yeah,
the first things start to trickle in and you kind of go, yes, this people are getting it?
Yeah, I mean, I did, but you never, I don't think, I mean, I still don't really, you still don't actually believe that it's gonna, I'm sort of waiting for someone to be like, it's terrible or something. I don't know, like, or just, yeah, it's hard. It's like, and and it's all that thing of like, building a momentum and then seeing if it's going to sell. And like, there are so many stages, and it's all, it all takes time. Like, it's not, I mean, that's the thing about books is, they come out and you have a launch day and you have a party or whatever, but actually nothing happens on that day. It's sort of the slow burn. I mean, unless you're like a hugely well-known like Lee Child or something, and then everything happens, immediately. But I think for writers like me, it's like, yeah, it's this build and this word of mouth thing and this like talking to people all the time. And so it's really nice to hear that people are talking about it. That's the most I could hope for, really.
We're right at the the end of January, a brand new year. Did you have favourite books last year? I don't know if you're a person who we had a top 10 each.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, and it's there's a running joke between me and Kaz, who's my best friend, who the interviews were her idea, and the running joke is that every year I have an existential crisis about what is going to be on the list, and I drive everybody around me insane for about 3 weeks in a mad panic, and then eventually the list is done, and I hate choosing. I don't want to choose.
I know, it feels like you're, I know, it does feel, and also, actually, I mean, I'm impressed. I mean, I often forget what books I've even read, let alone what they're about. But no,
I've got so many notebooks.
Oh, yeah, I write them down now, actually. And then as soon as you see the name, you're like, oh, yeah, and you remember what it was about. But I loved the thriller I really loved last year was I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay. I don't know if you...
Oh, I haven't read that. That can go on the list.
It's really good. It's like sort of set in a posh boarding school in America, and it's about sort of podcasting, and there was an unsolved crime, or actually a solved crime, but maybe solved in the wrong way. And I also loved The Quiet Tenant by Clemency. Oh my goodness, I can't remember. She's French, her second name. That's really good. That's about a woman who's been held in a basement of a man's house for like 10 years or something. And that's really great. And have you read The Trap by Catherine Ryan Howard? Oh,
No, it's on my list.
Okay, well, if you liked One of the Good Guys, I think you'll love The Trap. We're dealing with really similar sort of themes, yeah. Basically, it's a totally different story, obviously, but I think it's really interesting. Yeah, I loved that book. So yeah, that's probably my top 3 thrillers I've thought. But I also loved Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, actually, by Gabrielle Zavin. I loved that. I mean,
I've got that to read. Again, it's hard to try and fit things in, isn't it? My reading list is mainly for the interviews.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is not a bad way to create a reading list.
No, it's a good way. That's very true. But it is true. It's like being in a book club, isn't it? It's like you read that book first, and then So, but yeah, no, I'm the same. I've got piles of books that I would like to get through.
I've started to move some things around today, and this is mainly my to be read list for
that
interviews.
Dorothy Goomson is brilliant.
Yes, I've wanted to read it since it's been a while, and I can't wait to read it.
It's really, really good. That's the only one I've read of the ones behind you, and it's absolutely brilliant.
I will say that The Mercy Chair turned up yesterday by Mike Craven. I'm excited. I started it last night.
Really?
And,
I saw David Headley actually giving away a proof copy on Instagram, and I was like, I quite want to apply for that, but then I thought, oh, no, I can't. But yeah, it looks really good.
We have got 3 minutes left, and I'm wondering what because obviously this is this the 5th book? for you?
This is my sixth one, actually.
Sixth.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what. Sorry, my daughter is trying to ring me. I'm just hanging up and telling her to ring her dad. I apologise. So she's completely thrown me off. Thank you, darling. If you ever see
you were
this.
going to say it was the sixth book, and I don't know what you were going to say after that.
No, she's completely thrown me off.
Yeah.
And it was all going so well. First one of the year.
It was been brilliant. It's been a brilliant conversation.
Memorable moments for you as an author is where I was going. So this is the sixth book.
Yeah.
And you must have had so many amazing experiences during that time. So what really stands out for you?
Well, I mean, I do really love doing events, and like either online or in person, and meeting readers is brilliant, and all that sort of stuff. So those are lots and lots of memorable moments. But things like I had one of a book I wrote called Imperfect Women was optioned by Elizabeth Moss's production company. And that's pretty amazing when you're getting phone calls and then you're talking to people in Hollywood and places. So it's just, I think books are incredible because they sort of just take you. I mean, I think whether you're reading them or writing them, they take you to all these different places that you never thought you were going to make it to. So lots of things like that, I would say.
And on that note, do you want to give everybody a reminder of what they are going to go away and buy?
Well, hopefully they're going to go away and buy One of the Good Guys by me, Araminta Hall, and it's available wherever you buy books, basically.
Do you want to give us a quick recap?
Well, yeah, it's about two young women going missing on a coastal walk. And good guy Cole has recently moved to the area, and he becomes a bit of a prime suspect. But he's nursing a broken heart, and he's recently met and connected with this artist Lenny, who's living on her own right on the edge of the cliff.
And I think that is a good place to leave it.
Yeah.
I think we've given everybody enough of an idea that they need to go and read it to find out what exactly happens and why Cole thinks he's one of the good guys.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this for months.
Oh, thank you.
And I was so excited that you agreed to do it. So thank you very much. Oh, and on that note, go and read One of the Good Guys. It's fantastic.